In late March of 2023, it was officially announced that the ReZero anime would be getting a third season. If you are watching this video, that probably means you are a fan of the ReZero anime and have wondered at least once whether you should read the web or light novels. After all, who wouldn't want to see what happens next for Subaru, Emilia, Byakuya, Ram, and all the rest of the cast? The goal of this video is to help you decide for yourself whether reading the ReZero novels is worth your time. I will briefly cover my personal experience with reading the web novel and what to expect should you decide to read either the light or web novel. This video assumes you are at least caught up with the anime and will contain some spoilers if you have not finished Season 2. As far as post-Season 2 content, it is impossible to give a properly detailed answer to the question posed in this video's title without totally avoiding spoilers. However, spoilers for Season 3 of the anime and beyond will be very minor, and will only serve the purpose of helping you decide whether you are interested enough in diving into the novels for yourself. I don't think they will affect your experience whatsoever should you choose the option to check out the web or light novels. They will simply help you assess whether you will find it worth your time. What this video will not discuss in detail is where or how to read the novels, the alternate timeline if stories, or any of the rest of the branching side stories ReZero author Tappei Nagatsuki has written regarding the world of ReZero, of which there are quite a few. I am just trying to give you a window to look through. It is up to you to decide whether you want to open the door and start exploring on your own. ReZero was one of the first anime I watched back when I was new to the anime scene, and was an instant favorite that left a lasting impression on me. So naturally, for a long time, I desired to read the light novels in order to get more background details, as well as to see what happened next. I watched Season 2 concurrently as it aired, and found some great videos which expanded on the cut content from the anime, resulting in my interest for reading the source material increasing. But life as a poor and busy college student kept me from getting around to actually doing so. Until January 2023, when I finally decided to take the plunge and read the ReZero web novel translation, provided by Witch Cult Translations. I am making this video somewhat for the sake of it being the kind of thing I wish I would have had before I started. So, should you read the ReZero web novel or light novel? Well, if you are a fan of the anime and strongly want to know how the story continues, then the short answer is probably yes. ReZero never stops being ReZero. And whatever you enjoyed about the anime, the novels will probably continue to do that for you in the subsequent arcs. For me, that was watching Subaru struggling just to survive. As I like to say, for me, ReZero is at its best when Subaru is dying. On the other hand, if you like ReZero for the character growth, there's plenty of that too. Or if you like it for the lore and the world building, again, the novels won't disappoint. The longer answer, however, is what will occupy the remainder of this video. If you still haven't already decided you want to read ReZero, then at this point, the answer to should you is, ultimately, it depends. There is a lot to gain out of doing so, but it comes with a set of pros and cons that I did not anticipate when I first started my foray into the web novel. You see, even though I gained a lot of happiness from reading the web novel, I also found a few things to be frustrating. The real reason I made this video is so that if you decide you want to read ReZero like I did, you will at least have a better idea of just what you are getting yourself into. And I don't just mean that as a content warning, because you should already know by now from the anime that you should expect there to be horror, trauma, and gore in ReZero. So first, the logical question at this point is, between the light novel and web novel, which should you even pick? There are plenty of videos you can find already addressing this topic should you be so inclined, so I'll suffice to say that some of the main considerations include cost, length, and the quality of translation and writing. The ReZero light novels are considered the official ReZero canon. The anime and manga are based off of the light novels, which are distributed by Yen Press. Therefore, to get your hands on your very own copy, it will require going to your local bookstore or favorite online retailer and purchasing each volume individually. The web novel is technically considered non-canonical and is not the source reference used by the anime. I say technically, however, because the web and light novels are very similar. Yet, the web novel is freely available to access, And so is the English fan translation of it, which is the version I read, located at the Witch Cult Translations website. With there currently being 21 volumes of ReZero in print, plus spin-off and side stories, the price you'll need to pay if you want the complete set is a bit hefty. One option would be only buying volumes which pick up from where the anime left off to save some cash, should you choose that route. The story covered by the anime so far continues beginning with volume 16. That gives you at least 6 books worth of new material to read right away. If you are totally strapped for cash, though, the novel is free, and you can't beat free. Now, there is a good amount of content in the novels that the anime cut, some of which will be important going into the later arcs. So it'll be up to you how much of that you are okay with skipping if you plan on just picking up from the end of Arc 4, where Season 2 of the anime wound up. But when it comes to reading the web versus light novel, deciding how much you want to pay is going to be an important choice. As I already alluded, the light and web novels are extremely similar in content, and the difference between them in canonicity is mostly technical. A couple of changes are made in some places, but they don't really affect the plot in the long run. The biggest difference between the two comes down to length. Tappei Nagatsuki writes and publishes the web novel version all on his own, without oversight from editors, freely available for anyone to read online. In that sense, you could say it is more of a raw version of the story. Descriptions and details are therefore present in the web novel that are later revised, edited, or even removed from the light novels. Another way of saying this is that the light novels could be considered a more refined version of the story, one which has been reviewed and revised by a team of professional editors. I would note that even without editors, Tappei Nagatsuki still does a pretty good job in his writing, so it's not like you have to worry about reading something with bad fanfiction levels of writing quality in either case. Also, the majority of the content that gets abridged, condensed, or removed entirely is usually what you can call filler. In other words, conversations and scenes that are not crucial for the plot's advancement, like small talk, or characters arguing and teasing one another. In some rare cases, details from the lore, historical events and characters, or world building do get omitted if they don't really matter for the story itself. In the end, though, the light novel is very faithful to the web novel, with virtually no significant changes to the story or important plot points. So, if not missing a single piece of lore in ReZero is an important factor for you, the web version might be the one you're looking for. If you are simply eager to read what happens next, the light novels are somewhat more condensed and move along with faster pacing. Even if Tappei Nagatsuki is himself a pretty decent writer, what about the person who is translating? Nobody can translate anything perfectly, but you might expect the professional translation done by the folks at Yen Press to be of a higher quality. At least, that's what I thought. Surprisingly, the fan translation of the web novel is pretty good in its own right. Actually, based on the several volumes of the light novel I do own, I can say that I have seen more than just a couple of grammar errors, translation issues, and so on, in even them. Many basic errors come down to different translation choices between the light novels and anime. For example, the appa fruit seller in the anime is called an apple seller in the light novel. But these are mere inconsistencies. Some more obvious errors that are much more pressing can still be found. The web novel isn't perfect either, with its own fair share of errors and mistakes. So ultimately, if you must rely on an English translation for the light or web novels, I think you're about as well off either way. I unfortunately can't speak for translations into other languages. Here's a chart summarizing the various merits and drawbacks to reading the light novel versus the web novel. Once you have made your decision, you should be able to start reading, right? Not so fast. As I already mentioned, a good amount of content gets cut in each rendition as the story evolves from web novel to light novel to manga or anime. While I'm on the subject, I should briefly mention that while the manga exists, I have not seen anyone recommend reading it over the lighter web novels to any fans of the anime. The manga is apparently behind the anime, let alone the light novels and the web novel. I think that if you are still here watching this video, you ought to be more interested in what was cut from the web and light novels in the anime itself. Also, from now on, I will refer to both the light and web novel collectively as the novels. There are sources you can go to for a quick summary of what the anime cut, much of which is unimportant, and some of which is extremely important, to the point that without reading it beforehand, you will be left confused at points in the novels. Personally, I'd recommend rereading arcs 1 through 4, because I gained a lot of insight into the events of the stories and the characters that I didn't glean from the anime alone, especially arc 4, considering it has a pretty complex chronology and contains a lot of moving pieces. Another benefit of revisiting the earlier arcs is that they'll give you a chance to familiarize yourself with the writing style of Tappei Nagatsuki before you start delving into the uncharted territory of the post-anime storyline. Now, if you are someone who has read a lot of Japanese light novels, even if as translations, you are probably more familiar than I am with the differences in Japanese writing styles from Western writing and storytelling. They take a bit of getting used to if, like me, you have only read a handful of series, or if you have never before read any light novels at all. But Japanese writers typically do have a style as a whole that English readers ought to be aware of, and Tappei Nagatsuki is no exception. I will outline a few of the major ones that I wish I had been told about before I began reading the web novel. First, many characters have their own distinct speech patterns. Of course, this is a writing tool to give each character their own personality and sense of ethos. The ReZero novels often like to wait before disclosing who is speaking a particular line or lines of dialogue, sometimes for up to a few paragraphs. Speech patterns, honorifics, characteristic pronouns, and so on, which may or may not translate smoothly, would normally clarify the speaker right away for the Japanese audience, in most cases. But I often found myself having to jump up and down the page locating who is speaking, if I couldn't determine it right off the bat. For instance, Roswell's speech quirk, as you've noticed in the anime, is regularly dragging out one or two syllables in a sentence for emphasis, and it is sometimes left to the reader to pick that up on their own before Roswell's name is provided as having said what he said. Or when multiple characters are bantering back and forth together, the whole conversation is presented at once, and then the conversers' names are revealed once the punchline has been delivered. This sort of thing happens all the time in the novels, with virtually every character possessing their particular verbal tics and quirks, which the reader must pick up on to identify the speaker readily. Apparently, this is just a thing that goes on in lots of Japanese novel writing, but personally, I found this style of writing unnecessarily complicated and sometimes even exhausting. In a few rare cases, whole chapters might be dedicated to a certain character's backstory or point of view, without revealing who is being spoken of until the end of the chapter, leaving me needing to reread the whole thing just to understand who it was talking about all along. It's not that this isn't a viable storytelling method. It's just that I started to find it unnecessary and overused as the novels went on. Fortunately, the Witch Cult translators went out of their way to ascribe a lot of the dialogue to the correct speaker in many of the chapters, which alleviates this problem quite a bit in the web novel. Now, if that isn't confusing enough, another tendency the novels have is for dialogue between characters to often jump from verbal communication to thoughts in the point of view character's headspace, and then back into spoken language, all as if the conversation had proceeded in that fashion without breaking. This can feel jarring at first to the reader, as superficially, it sort of looks something like mind reading, where the conversation continues straight from a point the character just thought about in his or her mind. The reader has to be ready to go with the flow, and assume that the conversation steered in the direction of the character's thoughts without being shown as happening in the dialogue itself, which takes some getting used to. Furthermore, Subaru and the other characters frequently have character asides where they mutter to themselves, but it isn't strictly clear they are not directing their line to whoever is their conversation partner, or they just speak a sentence out loud to themselves. In a hypothetical example, while looking around a new environment and taking in the landscape, they might mutter an observation under their breath. Basically, the transition from headspace to verbal speech is rather fluid in the novels, and sometimes you just have to pick your own interpretation of who a character is speaking to and how much of a conversation is actually taking place. Lastly, for those unfamiliar with Japanese, like myself, in Japanese, dialogue is represented in writing by using key brackets rather than quotation marks, like us Westerners are more familiar with. Not always do the web novel translators convert these over in their translations. If you see those brackets while reading, just think of them as quotation marks. So with these idiosyncrasies in writing style taken into account, if I were telling my former self about what to expect when reading ReZero, the next thing I would mention is its length. The web novel is, for better or worse, very long. So long, in fact, that when I first started reading the web novel, it was January, and I only just caught up to the latest web novel chapter, Chapter 9 of Arc 8, last week, which was in mid-May. I was simply not prepared for how much of a beast the web novel is. Mind you, I currently work a full-time job with long hours, but aside from mandatory personal care such as cooking, cleaning, working out, and bathing, I spent most of my free time during those months just reading. So perhaps my single biggest warning for anyone looking to pick up the novels, especially the web novel, is to expect a hefty time commitment. Now is also a good time to note that the English release schedule of the light novels currently puts the most recent volume you can go out and buy at 21, which opens up Arc 6. A minute ago, I listed the latest web novel chapter as of the time of writing this script, which was from early Arc 8. Since the anime is only adapted to the end of Arc 4, those of you keeping score at home have probably already guessed about how much new material that you can expect from these respective versions of the novel. Incidentally, it is anticipated that ReZero will have a total of 12 arcs when finished. If you have heard the number 11 in the past, the splitting of Arc 7 and subsequent renumbering is a recent bit of news from Tappei Nagatsuki. As in, it just happened a few weeks ago. Therefore, if you don't want to commit yourself to an excessive amount of reading, the route of picking up at the beginning of Arc 5 in the novels would be a good plan. Just be sure to go look over the important cut content that the anime did not cover before you begin. But if time is not an issue for you, or you would prefer to discover for yourself all the little details the anime left out, then I again recommend reading Arcs 1 through 4 before continuing into Arc 5 and beyond. There is a lot of extra detail and hidden hints and clues to the many mysteries, theories, and speculation ReZero has to offer, which makes starting over from zero, Arc 1, absolutely worth it. So that concludes the main part of this video, and gives my answer to the question prompted in the title. At this point, you have all the information I can give you to make your own decision on whether or not to dive into the ReZero novel of your choice. If you want to stick around a little longer, I will give you a couple other gripes and criticisms I personally had. Fair warning, very minor spoilers ahead for Arc 5 and after, depending on what your definition of a spoiler is. So as I already mentioned, the novels as a whole are extremely long, and I kind of realized by the time I was about halfway through Arc 6 that I may have bitten off more than I could chew. A small part of the blame, and where I hit a few walls in my reading experience, came during certain points in the story. Many times, there are long bits, sometimes chapter-long bits, of background exposition being given for side characters. Always, these focus on the struggles that the character faces right at that moment, and how the culmination of their lives has led to this moment of weakness that they are facing right there. Times where you may remember this has happened in Arc 4 include Amelia's childhood memories growing up in the Elior Forest, and Otto Suin's backstory of struggling as a child with his divine blessing of understanding animal languages. While these moments are great for writing character development, they slow down or even interrupt the action as a consequence. To an extent, the anime avoids this pitfall by being a visual medium, thus having the capacity to show much more than it needs to tell. Considering that this trope happens more and more frequently in the later arcs as more characters get introduced, I was finding myself getting annoyed by all the pauses in the action, no matter how much character depth and understanding was gained along the way. Another trope ReZero is exceedingly guilty of is the one of a character jumping out of nowhere to save someone at the last second, with perfect timing, and their approach to the scene going totally unnoticed by characters who are supposed to be very perceptive and competent. As dramatic a storytelling tool as it is, Tappei Nagatsuki overuses it, to the point where you start being able to pick apart Subaru's doomed time loops from his successful ones ahead of time, merely by noticing when characters start being suspiciously more lucky and durable than they were previously. There's also the trope of characters speaking lines faster than objects in the real world can physically act, especially during what are supposed to be the brisk action scenes. You know how when Wile E. Coyote has the time to look back at the cliff he accidentally just ran past the edge of, then has time to look back up at the camera, then has time to hold up a sign with the word "Yikes" written on it, all before gravity finally actually takes effect? It's like that. A big fight might be going down, and in the middle of swinging a punch, one of the combatants has the time to explain how they noticed the gap in their opponent's defense, and how they are now free to exploit it, and that gives them the advantage from this point on, and that the weather is nice today, and that it's a shame the Red Sox lost again last week, and that, and that, and that, all in the short span of time before the punch actually hits. I exaggerate, but this trope is given a pass in many media, especially in anime, and it always bugs me. ReZero is no different. This dumb trope definitely occurs in the novels more frequently than it should. And finally, my last major criticism of ReZero is that the later arcs started feeling gimmicky compared to the early arcs, which flowed more naturally and chronologically. This is where I would need to divulge some major spoilers to express what I mean more accurately, which I want to avoid in this video. So, to be as vague as possible, I'll compare them to the famous cliffhanger Arc 3 ended with. After Arc 4, pretty much every arc ends with a game-changing twist, comparable to Who's Rem? To varying extents, these twists often come completely out of left field, forcing the events that follow in the next arc. As a result, every arc becomes vastly different, in a way that, as I said, starts to feel gimmicky, especially as it happens over and over, and new developments cease to feel as earned as they were before. While it is a good thing that each arc is unique, in my opinion, the transitions are noticeably more forced compared to the natural, narratively earned transitions that happened between arcs 1 and 2, 2 and 3, and 3 and 4. Still, don't take all this criticism to mean that I would discourage you from reading it. As a whole, I really enjoyed binging the web novel, and made a lot of memories while doing so. The main reason I chose the web novel in the first place was because it was free, but if money was no object, I think I would probably tell my former self to pick up the light novels instead. That having been said, Witch Cult Translations is a phenomenal resource for accessing all the additional side content, if routes, and X stories that there are to explore. And discovering that site was a boon for my budding entrance into the ReZero lore. And there is a lot of side content you can get yourself sucked into, so don't be afraid to spend a little time orienting yourself or doing some searches to find your way around. Ultimately, by reading the web novel, a lot of my questions from the anime got answered, while many more of the mysteries plaguing me still have not been sufficiently resolved. Some of these questions include, why was Subaru summoned in the first place? What is the true nature of his authority? How does it relate to other characters hinted to have been summoned from Japan into that world? And do they share Subaru's relationship to the Witch of Envy? You, dear viewer, are almost certainly likewise wondering such questions as, will Rem wake up and have her memories restored to Ram, Emilia, and the others? What is the nature of the witch cult and the Sin Archbishops, and will Subaru encounter more of them? What is their actual connection to the witch? What really happened to the other witches of Sin? And what was the full extent of their powers and authorities? Why was Echidna's appearance in the tomb different from her appearance in the dream world? Is Subaru's relationship with Emilia related to his relationship with Satella? Will Emilia emerge victorious from the royal selection and be crowned as the new ruler of Lagunica? What secrets are the other 4 candidates still hiding? Is Subaru eventually going to also defeat the Black Serpent, the third witch beast of gluttony? Why doesn't Reinhardt just do it, and put a stop to the witch cultists while he's at it? And perhaps, most important of all, who is the best couple to ship? In attempting to not spoil anything for you, I will simply state that some of these questions have indeed been answered or hinted at, and that alone is the most motivating thing I can think of as far as why you should read ReZero's novels. One of ReZero's biggest draws is that its mysteries are constantly answered in satisfying ways, as long as you are patient enough to wait for them. And as for the ones that have not yet been answered, well, it seems clear to me that Tappe Nagatsuki is holding his cards close to his chest for now. But all the evidence I have read up to this point indicates that all the secrets will eventually be revealed. So while I admit that my fanaticism for ReZero has been somewhat subdued by the novels and how slow of a burn they can sometimes be, I still remain a huge fan, and am only finding myself more impressed by how enthralled I find myself each and every time I re-watch the anime. In short, the anime is a masterpiece, and the book doesn't disappoint either. Should you read it? I think so, unless one of the caveats I have outlined really turns you away for some reason, in which case go ahead and wait for Season 3 of the anime. I believe waiting for something is an important psychological factor in subconsciously increasing your overall enjoyment of that thing. Furthermore, I fully expect that the anime will continue to be not just one of the greatest isekais, but one of the greatest animated shows of all time. So, if you would prefer to hold off on reading the novels for now and just wait for the anime, that's fine. Just be sure you don't die first and miss it.